Stephen Hunter's heart pounds as he crouches in the shadows of the Sakari research facility on Zarkon. He's here to rescue Vega, but his mission isn't what it seems. The renowned human explorer scans the eerily quiet corridors, his instincts screaming that this infiltration is too easy. Sweat beads on his forehead as he reaches Vega's cell. The door slides open with a soft hiss, revealing the captive Sakari female. Her beauty is breathtaking, even in her current state of distress. As Stephen steps forward, Vega's eyes widen in terror. She presses herself against the far wall, trembling. "Stay back, human monster!" she hisses, her melodious voice tinged with fear. Stephen freezes, realizing the depth of the Sakari propaganda. In Vega's eyes, he's not a savior, but a violent kidnapper. He raises his hands, speaking softly. "I'm here to help, Vega. I won't hurt you." She doesn't believe him. As Stephen takes another step, Vega lunges for the door. In his haste to stop her, Stephen's elbow strikes the control panel. Alarms blare. The facility locks down, trapping them together. "No!" Vega wails, cowering in the corner. Stephen's mind races. He needs Vega's trust, and fast. Security forces will arrive soon. More than that, he knows she holds the key to humanity's survival. Information about a Sakari superweapon capable of destroying Earth. Drawing on years of covert research, Stephen recalls Sakari physiology. He approaches Vega slowly, hands outstretched. "Let me show you my true intentions," he says, voice steady despite the urgency coursing through him. With precise movements, Stephen begins stimulating specific nerve clusters on Vega's arms. Her eyes widen in shock as waves of pleasure ripple through her body. Fear gives way to confusion, then curiosity. What are you doing?" she gasps, leaning into his touch. "Proving I'm not here to harm you," Stephen replies, continuing his ministrations. He can hear heavy footsteps in the distance. Time is running out. As Vega's fear melts away, replaced by growing attraction, Stephen notices a change in her scent. His stomach drops as he realizes what's happening. He's inadvertently triggered her mating cycle. If left unfulfilled, it could kill her. The stakes have risen dramatically. Stephen must navigate this delicate situation, pleasuring Vega to gain her trust and ensure her survival, all while uncovering the truth about the Sakari weapon. The fate of Earth hangs in the balance, and it all hinges on what happens in this small cell in the next few minutes. With security forces closing in and Vega's breaths coming in short gasps, Stephen makes his choice. He leans in close, whispering, "Trust me, Vega, I'm here to save you. And you might just save humanity in return." Stephen's words hung in the air as Vega's eyes locked onto his, a mixture of fear and curiosity swirling in their depths. The alarms continued to blare, their urgent wails a constant reminder of the danger closing in around them. I don't understand," Vega whispered, her melodious voice trembling. "Why would a human want to save me?" Stephen's fingers continued their intricate dance across Vega's skin, eliciting small gasps from the Sakari female. Her iridescent skin began to pulse with a soft, ethereal glow, a sight that both fascinated and alarmed Stephen. "Because we're not the monsters your people believe us to be," Stephen explained, his voice low and urgent. "There's so much you don't know, Vega. So much your leaders have hidden from you." As he spoke, Stephen noticed a change in Vega's scent, a sweet, intoxicating aroma that made his head spin. He recognized the signs immediately. His actions had inadvertently triggered her mating cycle. Vega's breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "What's happening to me?" she asked, her voice a mix of panic and something else, a hunger Stephen hadn't expected. "I've activated your mating cycle," Stephen admitted, his mind racing. "It's a biological process that can be dangerous if left unfulfilled. But right now, we need to focus on escaping." The sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, growing louder with each passing second. Stephen made a split-second decision. "Vega, I know this is difficult, but I need you to trust me," he said, his eyes boring into hers. "I can show you the truth. About humans, about your people, about everything. But it requires a mental link. Will you allow it?" Vega hesitated, her body trembling with the effort of restraining her growing urges. The footsteps grew closer. Finally, she nodded. Stephen placed his hands on either side of Vega's face, closing his eyes in concentration. A flood of images poured from his mind into hers. Earth in all its beauty, the true nature of human-alien relations, the devastating potential of the Sakari superweapon. Vega gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "It can't be," she whispered. "Our leaders, they lied to us?" Before Stephen could respond, the door to the cell burst open. Security forces flooded in, weapons raised. "This way!" Vega cried, grabbing Stephen's hand. She pressed a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a narrow maintenance tunnel. They dove in just as energy blasts scorched the air where they had been standing. The tunnel was cramped and dark, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. Vega led the way, her skin glowing brighter now, providing just enough light to navigate. "How are you holding up?" Stephen asked, noticing Vega's labored breathing. "The cycle, it's intensifying," she panted. "I don't know how long I can—" Her words were cut off as they emerged into a wider corridor. A tall, imposing Sakari male stood before them, his eyes cold and calculating. "Dr. Zorn," Vega gasped. "You disappoint me, Vega," Zorn said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Did you really think you could escape? You, who are the key to our ultimate weapon?" Stephen's mind reeled at this revelation. Vega wasn't just a captive, she was an integral part of the superweapon itself. In one fluid motion, Stephen lunged forward. His hands found precise points on Zorn's body, applying pressure in a complex pattern. The Sakari scientist's eyes widened in surprise before he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Vega stared at Stephen in awe. You didn't kill him." "That's not our way," Stephen replied, grabbing her hand once more. "Come on, we need to keep moving." They raced through the facility, Vega's insider knowledge guiding them through a maze of corridors. But with each step, her condition worsened. Sweat beaded on her brow, and her legs began to tremble. Finally, they burst through a door and found themselves on a cliff edge. A dense alien forest stretched out below them. The whine of approaching vehicles told them their pursuers weren't far behind. "There!" Stephen pointed to a shimmer in the forest canopy, his cloak ship. "But it's too far to jump." Vega's eyes gleamed with grit, even as she swayed on her feet. "I can get us there," she said. "My people can glide short distances. If we link our bodies, I might be able to carry us both." Stephen hesitated, knowing such close contact would only intensify Vega's mating cycle. But as the sounds of pursuit grew louder, he realized they had no choice. "Do it," he said. Vega pressed her body against his, wrapping her limbs around him in a way that sent shivers down his spine. Her skin pulsed with bright, mesmerizing patterns. "Ready?" she whispered, her lips mere inches from his. Stephen nodded, his heart pounding. With a shared breath, they leapt from the cliff's edge, the wind rushing past them as they glided towards the forest below. As they descended, Stephen felt the heat of Vega's body against his, her need palpable and impossible to ignore. He knew that once they reached the ship, he would have to make a choice, one that could change everything. But for now, all that mattered was their escape, the information about the superweapon, and the beautiful, mysterious alien in his arms. The trees rushed up to meet them, and Stephen braced himself for landing, unsure of what awaited them on the forest floor. The wind whistled past Stephen and Vega as they glided through the air, the dense alien forest rushing up to meet them. For a moment, it seemed their daring escape would succeed. Then, without warning, Vega's grip on Stephen loosened. "I can't— Hold on," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the rushing air. Stephen felt her slipping away and tightened his hold on her. "Just a little further," he urged, but he could see the strain etched on her face. Suddenly, Vega's strength gave out completely. They plummeted towards the canopy below, branches whipping past them as they fell. Stephen's mind raced, his body moving on pure instinct. He twisted in midair, positioning himself beneath Vega to absorb the impact. They crashed through layers of foliage, leaves, and twigs tearing at their skin. Stephen grunted as his back slammed into a thick branch, momentarily knocking the wind out of him. They tumbled through the last few meters of the forest and hit the ground with a sickening thud. For a moment, all Stephen could hear was the pounding of his own heart. He blinked, trying to clear his vision, and became aware of Vega's weight on top of him. She wasn't moving. "Vega?" he croaked, gently rolling her onto her side. She moaned softly, her eyes fluttering open. "Stephen, I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice weak. He quickly assessed their situation. They were both battered and bruised, but nothing seemed broken. Vega, however, looked far worse than she had before their fall. Her skin, normally a shimmering opalescent hue, now pulsed with an alarming, feverish glow. Her breathing came in short, labored gasps. Stephen knew he had to act fast. He tapped the communicator on his wrist, activating his ship's autopilot function. "Navigate to my location," he commanded, hoping the vessel could maneuver through the dense vegetation. As they waited, Stephen turned his attention back to Vega. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly, her body trembling with each breath. He recognized the signs. Her unfulfilled mating cycle had reached a critical stage. "Vega, listen to me," Stephen said, cradling her face in his hands. "Your body is going into shock. I need to help you, but it's going to be intimate. Do you understand?" Vega nodded weakly, her eyes glazed with pain and need. Stephen took a deep breath and began to stimulate the sensitive areas of her body, drawing on his knowledge of Sakari physiology. He ran his fingers along the curve of her neck, down her arms, finding the nerve clusters that would bring her the most relief. Vega gasped, her back arching as waves of pleasure coursed through her. The vibrant pulsing of her skin slowed, and her breathing began to even out. Stephen continued his ministrations, feeling her body respond to his touch. Just as Vega's condition began to stabilize, a new sound cut through the forest, the whine of Sakari energy weapons. The security forces were closing in. "We need to move," Stephen said urgently, helping Vega to her feet. She swayed unsteadily, still weak from her ordeal. They stumbled through the underbrush, searching for cover. Stephen's eyes landed on a dark opening in a nearby rock face, a cave partially hidden by bioluminescent plants. He guided Vega towards it, ducking inside just as the sound of voices grew louder. The cave was cool and damp, its walls covered in strange, glowing symbols. As Stephen's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he realized they were looking at ancient cave paintings. The images depicted humans and Sakari, not as enemies, but as allies. Vega stared at the paintings in wonder. This can't be," she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and confusion. Before Stephen could respond, a familiar hum filled the air. His ship had arrived. He peered out of the cave entrance to see the vessel hovering just above the forest floor, its cloaking device shimmering. "It's now or never," Stephen said, gripping Vega's hand. "Ready?" She nodded, willpower replacing the fear in her eyes. They burst from the cave, sprinting towards the ship. The forest erupted with energy blasts as the Sakari security forces opened fire. Stephen activated the non-lethal weapons built into his suit, firing back at their pursuers. Beams of blue light arced through the air, temporarily paralyzing the Sakari soldiers they struck. They were mere meters from the ship when a stray energy bolt grazed Vega's shoulder. She cried out in pain but kept running. Stephen half carried her up the ship's ramp, slamming his hand on the control panel to close the hatch behind them. The ship's engines roared to life as Stephen took the helm, plotting a course for the nearest neutral space station. As they broke atmosphere, alarms blared. A Sakari battlecruiser had locked onto their position. "Hold on!" Stephen yelled as he executed a series of evasive maneuvers. The ship shuddered under the impact of enemy fire. A loud explosion rocked the vessel, and warning lights flashed across the control panel. The faster-than-light drive was offline. With options dwindling, Stephen spotted an uncharted planet on the navigation screen. "Brace for impact," he warned Vega as he aimed the damaged ship towards the alien world. They entered the atmosphere in a ball of fire, the ship's hull groaning under the strain. With a bone-jarring crash, they hit the surface, skidding to a halt in a tropical landscape of alien vegetation. As the dust settled, Stephen turned to check on Vega, and his heart nearly stopped. She lay motionless in her seat, her skin pulsing with an intensity he had never seen before. The crash had accelerated her biological crisis. Stephen knew what he had to do. He gently lifted Vega from her seat, carrying her to the ship's small living quarters. As he laid her down, her eyes fluttered open, filled with a primal hunger. "Stephen," she breathed, reaching for him. I know," he said softly, joining her on the bed. "I'm here." As their bodies entwined, Stephen felt a strange energy building within him. Each touch, each caress, seemed to awaken something new in his very cells. As they reached the peak of their passion, a surge of power coursed through Stephen's body. Afterward, as Vega lay peacefully sleeping, Stephen marveled at the changes he felt. His senses seemed sharper, his muscles coiled with newfound strength. He flexed his hand, watching as a small cut from their crash landing healed before his eyes. The ship's alarm system jolted him back to reality. Multiple Sakari drop pods were entering the atmosphere. Dr. Zorn and his forces were closing in. Stephen looked at the sleeping Vega, then at the ship's damaged systems. He knew he had to act fast. With his new abilities, he might stand a chance against the incoming threat. As he stepped out of the ship to survey their crash site, Stephen's mind raced with plans for fortification. He picked up a piece of the ship's hull, surprised at how light it felt in his enhanced state. The sound of distant explosions, the Sakari drop pods landing, spurred him into action. Stephen began to work, knowing that the fate of two species might rest on what happened in the coming hours on this uncharted world. Planet. Stephen took a deep breath, steeling himself for the fight ahead. The crash had left him disoriented, but the newfound energy coursing through his body sharpened his focus. He turned back to the ship where Vega was stirring. "We need to move now," he said, helping her to her feet. "The Sakari are coming." Vega nodded, her eyes clear and alert. The mating cycle had passed, leaving her rejuvenated. "I can help," she said, moving swiftly to the ship's control panel. "We might be able to use some of the damaged systems to our advantage." As Vega worked on repurposing the ship's technology, Stephen began gathering debris from the crash site. His enhanced strength allowed him to lift and move pieces of the hull that would have been impossible before. He quickly constructed a makeshift barricade around their position, using the alien vegetation to camouflage their defenses. The sound of the first drop pod impact echoed across the landscape. Stephen's heightened senses picked up the distant noise of Sakari troops mobilizing. "How's it coming?" he called to Vega. "Almost there," she replied, her fingers flying over the controls. "I've managed to reroute power to create a rudimentary energy shield. It won't stop them completely, but it should buy us some time." As if on cue, a shimmering barrier sprang to life around their position. Stephen watched in awe as the first volley of Sakari energy weapons dissipated harmlessly against the shield. "Nice work," he said, flashing Vega a grin. The smile faded as he saw the first wave of Sakari soldiers emerge from the jungle. Dr. Zorn's elite guards, their armor gleaming in the alien sunlight, advanced on their position with military precision. Stephen's body tensed, ready for action. As the guards reached the edge of the energy shield, he vaulted over the barricade, catching them by surprise. His enhanced speed and strength made him a blur of motion as he engaged the first group of soldiers. Muscle memory from years of training took over, but now each movement was amplified by his new abilities. Stephen disarmed the first guard with a swift strike, using the soldier's own weapon to incapacitate two more with well-placed stun blasts. Vega's voice crackled over the communications system she jury-rigged. "I've tapped into their comms. They're not expecting this level of resistance. Use it to your advantage." Stephen acknowledged with a quick nod, even though Vega couldn't see him. He pressed his attack, moving from one group of soldiers to the next. His non-lethal takedowns left a trail of unconscious Sakari in his wake. As the battle raged on, Stephen felt a familiar fatigue creeping into his limbs. The enhanced abilities were fading. He fought his way back to the ship, where Vega was alternating between monitoring the shield and disrupting the Sakari communications. "Vega," he panted, "I think I need to recharge." Understanding flashed in her eyes. Without a word, she pulled him close, their bodies connecting in a brief but intense embrace. Energy surged through Stephen once more, and he felt his strength returning. "Go," Vega said softly, pushing him back towards the fight. "I'll be here when you need me." The battle continued in this rhythm, Stephen engaging the Sakari forces, returning to Vega to recharge, then plunging back into the fray. Each time they connected, the bond between them grew stronger, more electric. From his command ship in orbit, Dr. Zorn watched the battle unfold with increasing frustration. His elite forces, trained to subdue the most dangerous opponents in the galaxy, were being systematically dismantled by a single human and his Sakari companion. "Enough," he snarled, turning to his weapons officer. "Prepare the prototype. We'll end this now." On the planet's surface, Steven and Vega had just begun to hope they might outlast the Sakari assault when a new threat appeared on their sensors. "Steven!" Vega called out, her voice urgent. "They're deploying some kind of new weapon. I've never seen readings like these before." Steven looked up to see a sleek missile-like object descending from the clouds. Its surface pulsed with an eerie green light that made his skin crawl. "We need to get out of here," he said, rushing back to the ship. "Can we fly?" Vega's hands flew over the controls. "I've managed to restore partial power to the engines and weapons, but the faster-than-light drive is still offline." "It'll have to do," Steven said, sliding into the pilot's seat. "We can't stay here." As Vega disengaged the energy shield, Steven fired up the engines. The ship shuddered and groaned, but lifted off the ground just as the prototype weapon detonated. A wave of sickly green energy washed over their previous position, leaving the area lifeless and drained. Steven pushed the damaged ship to its limits, flying low and fast through the planet's dense atmosphere. Sakari pursuit craft screamed after them, energy bolts lighting up the sky. "We need somewhere to hide," Steven said, his squeezing hard on the controls as he weaved through the alien terrain. "Somewhere they can't follow." Vega studied the ship's scanners, her mind racing through her knowledge of xenobiology. "There," she said, pointing to a region on the map. "That area is rich in thermal activity. The atmosphere there should be too caustic for Sakari physiology, but we should be able to withstand it." Steven altered course, pushing the engines harder. They broke through a bank of noxious clouds to find a landscape dotted with bubbling hot springs and erupting geysers. The mineral-rich atmosphere created a natural interference, and the Sakari pursuit crafts fell back, unable to maintain visual contact. With the last of the ship's power, Steven guided them to a landing near a network of caves. As the engines died, he and Vega emerged into the steamy, sulfurous air. "We should be safe here for now," Vega said, her bioluminescent skin pulsing in response to the charged atmosphere. "But we need to find a more permanent solution." Steven nodded, his eyes scanning the cave entrance. "Let's see what kind of shelter we can find in there. With any luck, it'll give us time to repair the ship and figure out our next move." As they approached the cave, neither of them noticed the faint, answering pulse of bioluminescence from deep within the darkness. The indigenous lifeforms, disturbed by the newcomers, began to stir, setting the stage for an encounter that would shape the next phase of their journey. Steven and Vega exchanged a determined look before stepping into the unknown depths of the cave, leaving the damaged ship and the steaming landscape behind them. The sounds of distant Sakari search parties echoed across the planet's surface, a reminder that their respite might be short-lived. Whatever awaited them in the caves, they would face it together. Together, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they entered the cave, the air grew thick with moisture and the faint scent of sulfur. The narrow passage twisted and turned, forcing them to proceed single file. Steven took the lead, his enhanced senses still partially active, allowing him to navigate the treacherous terrain. The deeper they ventured, the more the cave walls began to change. Faint specks of light appeared, growing in number and intensity until the entire cavern was bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. Bioluminescent organisms covered the walls, pulsing with an otherworldly rhythm. "Steven, look!" Vega whispered, her voice filled with awe. She reached out to touch a cluster of glowing fungi, and as her fingers made contact, the light intensified, spreading outward like ripples on a pond. The cave system seemed to respond to their presence, the patterns of light shifting and changing as they moved. Steven marveled at the sight, momentarily forgetting the danger that pursued them. Their path narrowed further, forcing them to squeeze through tight crevices and climb over slippery rock formations. At one point, Steven lost his footing on a particularly treacherous ledge, but Vega's quick reflexes saved him from a potentially fatal fall. "Thanks," he said, catching his breath. "I guess my new abilities are wearing off faster than I thought." Vega nodded, her bioluminescent skin pulsing in response to the heightened emotion. "We need to find a safe place soon. You'll need to recharge, and we both need rest." As if answering their need, the narrow passage suddenly opened into a vast underground chamber. Crystal-like formations jutted from the floor and ceiling, each one emitting a soft, pulsating light that matched the rhythm of Vega's bioluminescence. Stephen approached one of the crystals, studying its structure. "These look familiar," he said, his mind racing. "Vega, could these contain the compound we need to mask your genetic signature?" Vega's eyes widened as she examined the crystals. "You're right. There are trace amounts here. If we can gather enough, we might be able to synthesize a masking agent." Without hesitation, they began harvesting the crystals, carefully breaking off pieces and storing them in their packs. The work was slow and delicate, but the potential payoff was too great to ignore. Suddenly, the chamber trembled. Small pebbles skittered across the floor as the vibrations intensified. Stephen and Vega exchanged worried glances, their hands pausing mid-task. From the far end of the chamber, a massive shape emerged from the shadows. It resembled a giant luminous centipede, its segmented body easily the length of 3 transport ships. Dozens of legs rippled along its sides as it moved, and its antennae twitched, sensing the intruders in its domain. "Don't move," Stephen whispered, his body tensing for action. But his enhanced abilities had faded significantly, leaving him vulnerable to the creature's immense size and strength. The guardian centipede reared up, its front segments towering over them. It let out a high-pitched screech that reverberated through the chamber, shaking loose crystals from the ceiling. In that moment of crisis, Vega stepped forward. Her skin began to pulse rapidly, emitting patterns of light that mimicked the rhythm of the cave's bioluminescent life. She raised her hands, palms out, towards the creature. The guardian paused, its antennae waving curiously. It lowered its front segments slightly, head tilting as if listening to an unheard melody. "I think it's working," Stephen said softly, watching in amazement as Vega continued her silent communication. The tension in the chamber eased slightly, but the guardian remained wary, its body coiled and ready to strike. Stephen saw an opportunity in this momentary calm. "Keep it distracted," he whispered to Vega. "I'm going to gather more crystals. We need as many as we can get." As Vega maintained her bioluminescent dialogue with the guardian, Stephen moved carefully around the chamber's perimeter, collecting crystal fragments. He had just filled his pack when a new sound echoed through the cave system, the unmistakable whir of drilling equipment. The guardian centipede reared up again, agitated by the intrusion. Vega's attempts to calm it became less effective as the drilling intensified. "They've found us," Stephen said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to move now." But as they turned to flee, the chamber's exit collapsed in a shower of rocks and dust. The Sakari forces were breaking through, and they were trapped with an increasingly agitated cave guardian. Stephen's mind raced, assessing their limited options. The guardian thrashed about, its massive body creating dangerous cave-ins with each movement. And then an idea struck him. "Vega," he called out, dodging a falling stalactite. "We need to lure the guardian towards the Sakari drill site. It might be our only chance to break free and buy us some time." Vega nodded, understanding the risk, but seeing no alternative. Together they began to move strategically around the chamber, using their bodies and Vega's bioluminescence to guide the guardian's movements. The plan worked initially. As the first wave of Sakari soldiers breached the chamber wall, they were met with the full force of the guardian's thrashing body. Cries of surprise and pain echoed through the cavern as the soldiers were thrown back. But their victory was short-lived. A high-pitched whine filled the air, causing Stephen to wince and cover his ears. Beside him, Vega collapsed to her knees, her face contorted in agony. Sonic weapons, Stephen realized, his heart sinking. The Sakari had adapted their strategy, and now both the Guardian and Vega were incapacitated. As Sakari forces poured into the chamber, Stephen found himself facing an impossible situation. He had to protect Vega, fend off the soldiers, and somehow find a way to escape, all while the cave system itself seemed to be collapsing around them. In the chaos, a stray energy bolt struck one of the larger crystal formations. The crystal shattered, releasing a burst of energy that momentarily amplified the sonic weapon's effect. Stephen's eyes widened as an idea began to form. "Vega!" he shouted over the din of battle and falling rocks. "The crystals! They can amplify the sonic waves. If we can create a feedback loop. Despite her pain, Vega understood. She began to direct Steven, her knowledge of energy manipulation guiding his actions as he quickly arranged the crystals into a makeshift amplification array. The Sakari forces advanced, their weapons trained on the pair. Dr. Zorn's voice crackled over their comm links, demanding immediate capture. With a silent prayer, Steven activated the crystal array. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. A massive wave of amplified sonic energy swept through the chamber, incapacitating the Sakari soldiers and their equipment. But the victory came at a cost. The intense vibrations destabilized the already weakened cave system, triggering a chain reaction of collapses. "We need to move now," Steven shouted, scooping up the weakened Vega and their precious cargo of crystals. They raced through the crumbling cave system, narrowly avoiding falling rocks and closing passages. The disoriented guardian centipede thrashed wildly, inadvertently clearing some paths as it too fled the collapsing caverns. As they neared the surface, Steven's heart sank. Their original exit was completely sealed off by a massive cave-in. The sounds of pursuing Sakari forces echoed behind them, growing closer by the second. "There!" Vega pointed weakly to a narrow fissure in the cave wall, barely visible in the dim light. It might lead to the surface. Steven assessed the situation quickly. The fissure was too tight for both of them to climb together, and Vega was still weakened from the sonic attack. "You go first," he said, helping her towards the opening. "I'll boost you up." Vega started to protest, but Steven cut her off. "We don't have time to argue. Go!" Using the last reserves of his enhanced strength, Steven lifted Vega towards the fissure. She began to climb, her movement slow but steady. As Vega ascended, Steven turned to face the approaching Sakari forces and the confused guardian centipede. He picked up a fallen Sakari weapon, determined to buy Vega as much time as possible. The chamber shuddered violently, large chunks of the ceiling crashing down. Steven dodged and weaved, firing the weapon to keep the Sakari at bay while avoiding the guardian's thrashing limbs. "Steven!" Vega's voice echoed from above. "I've reached the surface." Relief flooded through him, but it was short-lived. The chamber was seconds away from total collapse. Steven looked up to see a makeshift rope of bioluminescent vines descending through the fissure. With the precious crystals secured in his pack, Steven leapt for the rope as the ground crumbled beneath his feet. His hands grasped the glowing vines, and he began to climb desperately as the cave system collapsed around him. Vega's face appeared at the top of the fissure, her eyes wide with fear and persistence as she struggled to pull him up. Steven's muscles screamed with exertion as he climbed, fragments of rock and crystal raining down on him. He was almost there, mere meters from safety, when a particularly violent tremor shook the fissure. Steven felt his grip on the vines loosen, his body swaying precariously over the abyss below. In the distance, the sounds of regrouping Sakari forces could be heard. Their mission, their very survival, hung by a thread as Steven dangled between salvation and certain doom. With one final surge of strength, he reached up towards Vega's outstretched hand, every fiber of his being focused on bridging those last crucial centimeters. Centimeters. Time seemed to slow as Steven's fingers strained to reach Vega's outstretched hand. With a final, desperate lunge, their hands clasped. Vega pulled with all her might, her muscles trembling with exertion as she hauled Steven up through the narrow fissure. They collapsed on the surface, chests heaving as they gulped in the fresh air. The ground beneath them shuddered as the cave system continued to collapse, sending plumes of dust billowing into the sky. "We made it," Steven gasped, his eyes meeting Vega's. Her bioluminescent skin pulsed with relief and exhaustion. "No time to rest," Vega said, scrambling to her feet. "We need to get to the ship before the Sakari regroup." They sprinted across the rocky terrain, the precious crystals secured in Steven's pack. As they approached their damaged vessel, Steven's heart sank. The ship bore the scars of their hasty escape and subsequent crash landing. "Can we even get this thing off the ground?" he asked, surveying the scorched hull and bent landing struts. Vega's eyes narrowed as she assessed the damage. "We don't have a choice. Help me with the repairs." They worked feverishly, Vega's expertise in Sakari technology complementing Steven's engineering skills. As they reconnected power couplings and patched hull breaches, Stephen noticed something strange. The bioluminescent patterns on Vega's skin seemed to pulse in sync with the energy surges in the ship's systems. "Vega, look," he said, pointing to an exposed power conduit. As Vega's hand passed near it, the energy flow stabilized, matching the rhythm of her bioluminescence. "Fascinating," she murmured. "The crystals must be affecting our bioelectric fields. We can use this to our advantage." With their newfound synergy, they completed the repairs in record time. As Stephen fired up the engines, Vega began the delicate process of synthesizing the masking compound. "How long until it's ready?" Stephen asked, his eyes fixed on the ship's sensors. Red dots appeared on the display, moving steadily towards their position. 10 minutes, maybe less," Vega replied, her hands moving deftly over the synthesizer controls. "But we won't be able to outrun them. We need a distraction." Stephen's mind raced. He grabbed the remaining crystals and headed for the ship's airlock. "I have an idea. Keep working on that compound." Outside, Stephen quickly set up a perimeter of crystal formations, angling them to create a network of energy pathways. He connected the final crystal just as the first Sakari transport crested the horizon. Back inside the ship, Stephen activated the makeshift defense system. A wave of amplified sonic energy erupted from the crystal array, sending the approaching Sakari forces into disarray. Vehicles veered off course, and foot soldiers stumbled, disoriented by the unexpected assault on their senses. "It's working!" Stephen exclaimed, watching the chaos unfold on the ship's view screen. But his elation was short-lived. A massive shape emerged from behind the Sakari lines, a colossal tunneling vehicle that seemed impervious to the sonic disruption. "Vega, we're out of time," Stephen called, his hands flying over the ship's controls. "Almost there," she replied, her voice strained. The synthesizer hummed, processing the final elements of the compound. The tunneling vehicle plowed through their defenses, crystal formations shattering in its wake. It reared up, ready to bore through the earth beneath their ship. "Now, Vega!" Stephen shouted. Vega grabbed the vial of shimmering liquid and downed its contents in one swift motion. For a moment, nothing happened. Then her bioluminescent patterns flared brilliantly before fading to a dull glow. On the sensor display, Vega's unique genetic signature vanished. The Sakari forces outside froze, their targeting systems suddenly bereft of their primary objective. Stephen seized the moment of confusion, firing the engines and launching the ship skyward. The vessel groaned under the strain, patches of hull plating rattling ominously as they ascended. "We're not going to reach escape velocity," Stephen growled, wrestling with the controls. The ship shuddered violently as it pushed against the planet's gravitational pull. Vega's eyes widened as she spotted a new threat on the long-range scanners. "Sakari battlecruiser, moving to intercept." Stephen's mind raced, assessing their options. The planet's gravity well behind them, Dr. Zorn's warship looming ahead, they were trapped. A wild idea struck him. "Vega, how well do you know Sakari ship layouts?" She blinked, surprised by the question. "Intimately. Why?" "Because we're going to crash land in their hangar bay," Stephen said, his teeth clenched. Vega's expression shifted from shock to understanding. "You're insane," she said, a smile tugging at her lips. "But it might just work." As they hurtled towards the battlecruiser, Vega guided Stephen through a series of evasive maneuvers. Their small ship darted and weaved, narrowly avoiding the cruiser's defensive fire. "There," Vega pointed to a shimmering force field, the entrance to the main hangar bay. "Aim for the center, where the field is weakest." Stephen gritted his teeth, pushing their battered vessel to its limits. They streaked towards the hangar, alarms blaring as the ship's systems redlined. "Brace for impact!" Stephen yelled. They crashed through the force field, skidding across the hangar floor in a shower of sparks. As the ship ground to a halt, claxons blared throughout the Sakari vessel. Stephen and Vega stumbled from the wreckage, disoriented but unharmed. They shared a look of disbelief, then purpose. "We made it this far," Stephen said, helping Vega to her feet. "Now comes the hard part." Vega nodded, her eyes scanning the hangar for threats and potential escape routes. "We need to reach the bridge," she whispered. "It's our only chance to end this." As they moved deeper into the battlecruiser, Stephen noticed something strange. He could sense Vega's presence without looking at her, almost feeling her thoughts and movements. A quick glance confirmed that their bioluminescent patterns were pulsing in perfect synchronization. "Vega," he whispered, "I think the crystals did more than just power our defenses." She nodded, her eyes wide with understanding. "An empathic link. This could give us an edge." Using their newfound connection, Stephen and Vega moved silently through the ship's corridors, anticipating each other's actions with uncanny precision. They ducked into alcoves and maintenance shafts, narrowly avoiding Sakari patrols. As they neared a restricted area, voices drifted from an adjacent laboratory. Stephen and Vega exchanged a glance, then crept closer to listen. "Don't understand why we're pursuing this human," a young Sakari scientist was saying. "The historical data doesn't support the level of hostility we're showing." "Careful," another voice warned. "That kind of talk could be considered treasonous." Stephen and Vega shared a look of surprise. Could there be allies among the Sakari crew? Vega stepped into view, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Please," she said softly, "we need your help." The young scientists whirled, their eyes wide with shock. Stephen tensed, ready for a fight, but Vega's calm demeanor held him back. "You're the fugitive," one of the scientists gasped, reaching for a communication panel. "Wait," Vega said, her voice gentle but firm. "There's something you need to know about the history of our peoples." As Vega began to speak, sharing her experiences and the revelations about the forgotten human-Sakari alliance, Stephen watched the scientist's expressions change from fear to curiosity, and finally to a dawning realization. "If what you're saying is true," one of them said slowly, "then everything we've been told about humans is a lie." Stephen stepped forward. "We can prove it, but we need to get to the bridge. Will you help us?" The scientists exchanged glances, then nodded. "We'll get you there," one said, moving to a nearby storage locker. "But you'll need these." As the scientists outfitted them with Sakari uniforms and security clearances, Stephen felt a mix of hope and apprehension. They were so close to their goal, but the most dangerous part of their journey still lay ahead. Disguised as crew members, Stephen and Vega followed the scientists through the ship's main corridors. Their hearts raced as they approached the bridge, knowing that beyond those doors waited Dr. Zorn and the fate of 2 species. Stephen's hand found Vega's, their fingers intertwining. Through their empathic link, he felt her grit and fear, mirroring his own emotions. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The bridge doors loomed before them, a final barrier between conflict and potential peace. Stephen took a deep breath, squeezing Vega's hand one last time before releasing it. With a nod to their Sakari allies, he reached for the door controls, ready to confront Dr. Zorn and change the course of human Sakari history. With a shared nod, they stepped forward as the bridge doors slid open. The scene that greeted them was one of controlled chaos. Officers rushed between stations, their voices a cacophony of urgent reports and status updates. At the center of it all stood Dr. Zorn, his imposing figure looming over a holographic display of the battlecruiser. As Stephen and Vega entered, the activity on the bridge ground to a halt. All eyes turned to the unlikely pair, a human and a Sakari, standing side by side in defiance of decades of hostility. Dr. Zorn's eyes narrowed as he recognized them. "Seize them!" he barked, but the order died on his lips as he noticed the Sakari uniforms they wore. Stephen stepped forward, his voice calm but forceful. "Dr. Zorn, we're not here to fight. We have information that could change everything." Vega moved in perfect sync with Stephen, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing in a mesmerizing display. "What you've been told about humans, about our shared history, it's not the full truth." For a moment, the bridge was silent. Then Dr. Zorn's curiosity got the better of him. "Speak," he commanded, his eyes never leaving the pair. Over the next hour, Stephen and Vega presented their case. They seamlessly alternated between human and Sakari perspectives, their empathic link allowing them to anticipate each other's thoughts and fill in gaps in their knowledge. They shared evidence of the ancient alliance, recounted their harrowing journey, and outlined the potential benefits of renewed cooperation. As they spoke, the assembled Sakari leaders and commanders of the joint human-Sakari fleet listened with rapt attention. The synchronized bioluminescent patterns of Stephen and Vega created a hypnotic display, emphasizing the unity of their message. Dr. Zorn, initially skeptical, found his determination wavering in the face of their compelling presentation. The undeniable proof and the obvious bond between Steven and Vega challenged everything he thought he knew. "If what you say is true," Dr. Zorn said slowly, "then our entire conflict has been based on a misunderstanding." A murmur rippled through the bridge. Steven and Vega exchanged a hopeful glance. "It's more than that," Vega said. "It's an opportunity to reclaim what we've lost, to forge a new future together." The Sakari leaders conferred quietly among themselves. The tension on the bridge was palpable as everyone awaited their decision. Finally, the eldest of the Sakari leaders stepped forward. "Your dedication and the strength of your connection are compelling. We agree to open diplomatic channels with the joint fleet." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Steven felt a wave of emotion through his link with Vega, a mixture of joy, relief, and cautious optimism. As preliminary negotiations began, Steven and Vega found themselves tasked with overseeing the dismantling of the superweapon project. They worked closely with a team of human and Sakari scientists, their combined knowledge proving invaluable in safely neutralizing the weapon's components. During the dismantling process, they made a startling discovery. The weapon's core contained a unique energy source, unlike anything they had encountered before. "This could have peaceful applications," Steven mused, examining the pulsing core. Vega nodded, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "The potential for scientific advancement is enormous." As they worked to extract the core, neither of them noticed the subtle shift in the ship's power readings. The unique energy signature of the weapon's core began to resonate with the battlecruiser's systems. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. The core pulsed with blinding intensity, sending a surge of energy coursing through the vessel's power grid. Steven and Vega staggered as the energy wave hit them. For a moment, their vision blurred, and they felt a strange tingling sensation throughout their bodies. When the sensation passed, they found their empathic link had intensified beyond anything they had experienced before. "Steven," Vega gasped, her eyes wide. I can see your thoughts." Before Steven could respond, a violent shudder ran through the ship. The intercom crackled to life with a frantic message. "Engineering to bridge. The energy surge has destabilized the engines. We're looking at a potential meltdown." Steven and Vega shared a look of purpose. Without a word, they sprinted towards the engine room, their enhanced connection guiding them through the chaos of panicking crew members. They burst into the engine room to find a scene of barely controlled panic. Engineers scrambled to contain the meltdown, but conventional safety protocols had already failed. Steven's enhanced perception took in the situation at a glance. "The containment field is collapsing," he said, moving towards the main control panel. Vega was already there, her hands flying over the controls. "We need to vent the excess energy through the external systems," she said, her voice tense. As they worked in perfect synchronization, Steven became aware of a growing warmth in his body. He glanced at Vega and saw her bioluminescent patterns flickering erratically. "The radiation," he realized aloud. "It's affecting us." Vega nodded grimly, never taking her eyes off the controls. "We don't have a choice. If we don't contain this, everyone on board will die." As they neared completion of the emergency procedure, Steven felt his enhanced abilities beginning to fade. Vega's unique Sakari physiology showed signs of severe stress, her movements becoming less fluid. With the ship's systems on the brink of collapse, Steven made a split-second decision. "Vega," he called out, extending his hand, "we need to channel the energy through us." Understanding flashed through their empathic link. Vega grasped Steven's hand, and together they connected themselves to the ship's power grid. A torrent of energy surged through their bodies. Steven gritted his teeth against the pain, feeling as if every cell in his body was on fire. Through their link, he could sense Vega's agony mirroring his own. For what seemed like an eternity, they stood as living conduits, their bodies glowing with the intensity of a small sun. Then, as suddenly as it began, the energy flow stopped. The alarms fell silent, the ship's systems stabilized. Steven turned to Vega, a weak smile on his face. "We did it," he whispered. Then darkness claimed them both, and they collapsed to the floor, their bodies intertwined. their bioluminescent patterns flickering weakly in the dimness of the engine room. The next thing Stephen was aware of was a soft, rhythmic beeping. His eyelids felt heavy as he struggled to open them, the harsh light of the medical bay assaulting his vision. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the fog from his mind. "Vega," he croaked, his throat dry and scratchy. A gentle hand touched his arm. "She's right here, Stephen. You're both safe." As his eyes adjusted, Stephen recognized Dr. Zorn standing beside his bed. The Sakari scientist's expression was a mix of concern and fascination. "What happened?" Stephen asked, memories of the engine room chaos flooding back. "You saved us all," Dr. Zorn replied, his voice filled with awe. "But the energy exposure, it changed you both." Stephen turned his head, relief washing over him as he saw Vega in the adjacent bed. Her eyes were closed, but her chest rose and fell steadily. As he watched, her eyelids fluttered open, and their gazes met. In that instant, Stephen felt a surge of emotions that weren't his own. Joy, confusion, and a deep sense of connection washed over him. He could see his own face through Vega's eyes, feel her relief at seeing him awake. "We can hear each other's thoughts," Vega said aloud, her voice filled with wonder. Dr. Zorn nodded eagerly. "The energy you channeled has fundamentally altered your physiology. Our medical team has been working non-stop to understand and stabilize your condition." As Stephen sat up, he noticed a faint glow emanating from his skin. Intricate patterns, similar to Vega's bioluminescence, danced across his arms. Vega gasped, her eyes wide. "Stephen, you're glowing." He looked at her, noticing changes in her appearance as well. Her muscles seemed more defined, her posture straighter. "And you look stronger," he observed. Dr. Zorn explained. "It appears you've developed a perfect blend of human and Sakari traits. Stephen, you've acquired bioluminescent abilities, while Vega has gained increased physical strength and endurance." Over the next few days, Stephen and Vega underwent a battery of tests as they acclimated to their new abilities. Their telepathic bond grew stronger, allowing them to communicate without words and share sensations. They found themselves moving in perfect synchronization, anticipating each other's needs and actions. As news of their transformations spread through the ship, Stephen and Vega became living symbols of human-Sakari cooperation. Crew members from both species sought them out, eager to witness the embodiment of their newfound alliance. During one of their examinations, Dr. Zorn approached them with excitement in his eyes. "We've made a fascinating discovery," he said. "The planet where you crashed, it's unlike anything we've encountered before. The crystal formations, the indigenous life. It's a perfect place to establish a joint colony." Stephen and Vega exchanged a look, their minds simultaneously recalling the beauty and danger of that world. "We'd like you to lead this endeavor," Dr. Zorn continued. "Your unique abilities and experiences make you ideal candidates to oversee the colony's development and foster cooperation between our species." The proposal took them by surprise, but as they considered it, a shared sense of purpose filled them both. Through their bond, they communicated their thoughts and feelings, weighing the opportunity before them. "We accept," they said in unison, their voices harmonizing perfectly. In the following weeks, preparations for the new colony went into overdrive. Ships from both the human and Sakari fleets converged on the planet, bringing supplies and eager colonists. Stephen and Vega worked tirelessly, their enhanced abilities allowing them to coordinate efforts with unprecedented efficiency. As they stood on the bridge of the lead ship, watching the planet grow larger in the view screen, Stephen took Vega's hand. Their bioluminescent patterns synchronized, creating a mesmerizing display. "Ready for our next adventure?" he asked, though he already knew her answer through their bond. Vega smiled, her eyes shimmering with excitement. "With you, always." The ship began its descent, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of two species united. As they approached the planet's surface, Stephen and Vega's thoughts turned to the challenges that lay ahead. But with their newfound abilities and the strength of their bond, they knew they were ready to face whatever the future might hold. The colony ship touched down on the alien soil, marking the beginning of a new chapter in human Sakari history. Stephen and Vega stepped out onto the planet's surface, their entwined hands raised in a gesture of unity. Behind them, a diverse crowd of humans and Sakari emerged, ready to build a shared future on this strange and wondrous world.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.